Hello everyone. This is Lavanya, Assistant Professor of English from Sri Sharada College for Women, Salem. In today's video or in today's class, we will be looking at the introduction of the Romantic poets. Let me move to the next slide. So this e-content I have prepared for the target audience of first BA English students, and the course title is British Literature 1, and the genre I have taken today is poetry, and the title is Romantic Poets. So Romantic poets, as we know, there are two generation, or there were two generation of Romantic poets. The first generation comprised of William Wordsworth and S.T. Coleridge, and the second generation comprised of poets like John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, George Gordon, and Lord Byron. So this class is going to be an introductory session. As in the previous class, we have seen about the characteristics of Romantic age, right? So I thought I would throw light on the important works done by these authors so that you can have an idea of how the Romantic poetry, was written during their time. So the period, it was from 1798 to 1837. So where do you locate the Romantic poets or the Romantic age in English literary history? It is from 1798 to 1837. So precisely, it was second half of the 18th century. And so what were the ideas, main ideas? The ideas of personal and political liberty, the autonomy of man, right? The autonomy of human. It comprised the main tenet of Romantic poetry. The liberty to write about anything and everything that is not going to be grandeur or sublime, which can be a commonplace or an ordinary thing too. That is the beauty of the Romantic poetry. And the next one comes is the energy and sublimity of the natural world. There is a tendency, or there was a tendency before the Romantic period, the neoclassical and the transitional period. People were trying to disregard the importance of the natural world around them. They were not ready to exalt the nature that is surrounding them, in each and every aspect. But the Romantic poets, they made it very specific that the nature should be celebrated. So the sublimity of the nature, it was one of the core ideas of the Romantic poetry. And the next one is to break away from the literary conventions of the 18th century. As I have told just before, the neoclassical age was returning. Right. So, as you were aware, the previous classes, the classical age is known for the conventions, like how a poetry should be written, how a novel should be written, right? How a play should be written. You should not go away or break away from the traditional rules that were governing the genres of, English literature. The neoclassical age, it was a kind of experimentation, but they have followed certain rules and regulations which were laid out during the classical age. But the Romantic age and the Romantic poets and the Romantic writers, what they did was they broke away from the literary conventions, right? They did not write about hero or the heroic deeds, or about the gods, or about something of a sublime nature or a characteristics. On the other hand, they were writing about something very commonplace, something very ordinary, right? They were writing about nature. Nature is in itself is very powerful, that we know about the significance and the importance of it, but often we don't pay attention to it. But the Romantic poets, they were concentrating on this aspect, right? They were exalting nature to a greater detail. And the first, that is the 18th century, can be divided into two parts. The first half, it was dedicated towards the neoclassical age, the following of the conventions and everything. On the other hand, the second half of the 18th century, it taught the writers to break away from those very literary conventions. And added to this was the French Revolution and its aftermath. It had the strongest impact of all. The French Revolution was started by the common people in France. They were fighting for their equality, liberty, right? They were fighting for it. They were fighting against the aristocrats. So the French Revolution, it had also got its impact in England, and the Romantic poets were using it to their specificities. So England supported the French Revolution at first, but failure from the French side denounced the revolution. So if you consider about England's role in the French Revolution, you could say that England was openly supporting the French Revolution. Right, it was advocating the French Revolution, that the people from the lower class, from the the bourgeois, the aristocrats, and the proletarians, they all should be treated equally. England was supporting them. But over the course of the revolution, it was quite a long revolution. Over the course of the revolution, the French people were not reciprocating the support that was rendered by England in the first place. So the England withdrew its support in the second half of the French Revolution. So this was the political climate or the milieu of the Romantic age. To put it short, what the Romantic poets did. So they emerged during the second half of the 18th century, right? And they were concentrating on the nature and the aspects of nature which could be found in commonplace occurrences, which are very important in human lives, but they were neglected during the previous age, right? And added to this was the impact of the French Revolution, right? And it created a very big impact in the lives of the people. England also, showed its support to the French Revolution by supporting the French people of the lower class. But the French people did not, reciprocate the support that were rendered by the England, and naturally, England withdrew the support. So moving on. So as I said, I'll be introducing the major names of the Romantic age and some of their important works, so that we could discuss about the characteristics of these works in the next class. So the first one is William Wordsworth. His personality and poetry were deeply influenced by his love of nature. He's a nature lover, right? He's a nature lover, and he had a great love for nature, which was reflected in his writings. So he was very much influenced by the sights and the scenes of the Lake County, right? And his earlier works, they were full of the poetic beauty of the commonplace things and people. He used to write about daffodils. He used to write about a reaper. He used to write about a tree and everything. That was so commonplace, right? So it's some of the examples or some of his earlier works were Margaret, Peter Bell, Michael, and the Idiot Boy. His use of ordinary speech was heavily criticized, but it helped to rid English poetry of the more artificial conventions of the 18th century. As we have previously seen, as I told you, the 18th century, the first half of the 18th century was full of conventions. Conventions are nothing but rules and regulations, like how a poetry should be written, how a novel should be written. A poetry, it should not speak about any commonplace thing. It should speak about something of importance. On the other hand, what Wordsworth did was he brought nature to the scene. He brought nature to the core, and he told that nature is also important, right? Nature is something that should be exalted, because it is one of the main, or it is the main thing that we depend on as human beings. So William Wordsworth, he was very much influenced by the sights and scenes of the village life, of the natural scenery that surrounded him, and it made him write pieces on nature, right? So some of his earlier works are, we have seen Margaret, Peter Bell, Michael, and the Idiot Boy. So, to put it simply, he's a lover of nature, and his love for nature was reflected in his writings. So here is a well-known poem titled Lucy, right? Lucy poems. So the well-known example is She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways. And another popular poem is The Solitary Reaper, Resolution and Independence. Then comes Daffodils, the Rainbow, and the sonnet, The World is Too Much With Us. Sonnet is nothing but a 14-line poem. Right, the Solitary Reaper. I know some of you must have learned in your school boards. Right, it was a part of the academia while we were studying. So I hope you must have read. The Solitary Reaper was one of the most popular poems, and Lucy, She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways, another popular poem. So when you look at these poems, or when you try to scan or skim these poems, you will get to know that he has written about very ordinary things, right? A reaper, right? A woman, an ordinary woman, daffodils, flowers, about a boy who is thinking about his, childhood, about a man who is thinking about his childhood, right? Everything is very commonplace. This is not something that could be, even some people would attack that this is not something suitable to write poetry or suitable subject for poetry according to the classical conventions. But no, this is what the romantic poets revolutionized, or they were the revolutionary people, figures, key figures, who brought nature to the core. And because of this, he was hailed as the father of romantic poetry, right? Who's the father of romantic poetry then? William Wordsworth. So he was recognized as a great English poet, a profound original thinker who created a new poetic tradition. So, what was the poetic tradition that was given by William Wordsworth? Is nothing but the love of nature, right? A love for a very commonplace thing, a love for very ordinary thing. It might be, on the outward or at the outset, it could look as a very common thing, a very ordinary thing, but it is not so. Because as if someone throws you a question, what is literature, your immediate answer as a literature student would be, literature is a reflection of life. We learn many things, from life around, the things around us, the people around us. We are surrounded by nature everywhere, right? What does a tree tell you? What does a cloud tell you? What does the rain tell you? So these are, the lessons that could be, observed in each and every aspect of nature, in each and every creation that is abundant in nature. Right? What does a plant tell you when it grows, when it is suffocated, when it is not given proper food? It shows resilience, right? What does a tree tell you? All the symbolism that could be easily associated, and the lessons could be learned from the nature. So this was the poetic tradition that was given by William Wordsworth. So then comes Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he, along with the Wordsworth, he written and published the volume called Lyrical Ballads in 1798. One of the popular works, Lyrical Ballads. The preface of the Lyrical Ballads, was very much popular because it lays down the principles of the Romantic tradition, right? The preface and its poems made it a seminal work and manifesto of the Romantic movement in English literature. What do you mean by a manifesto? It is kind of a Bible. It is a kind of a rule book, right? The lyrical ballads, when you look at the preface, you will get to know like what it is being done by the romantic poets or the writers of the romantic age, or what should be done, right? So that is what is being talked about in the preface. So this was written, the lyrical ballads was written by Coleridge and William Wordsworth. And then comes his most famous poems, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Kubla Khan, Christabel, right? So whenever the name of the, of Samuel Taylor Coleridge comes, it should be, recognized with the exotic image and supernatural themes, because you will see ghosts, you will see supernatural images, you will see unrealistic characters coming there, and you can't even decipher whether it is actually happening or it is a dream, right? So, if you get a chance to look at these poems, you can have a look at this. And, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a very popular one. It draws you in. You would like to know what is happening in the poem. If you start reading the first stanza of the poems of these, three poems, the Christabel, Kubla Khan, you won't be able to stop yourself, because such is the quality. It is full of imagery. It is full of supernatural things. It's full of exotic images that draws you in immediately. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he was known for supernatural themes in the Romantic tradition. William Wordsworth is not much of the, supernatural. He was not much for the supernaturalistic themes. On the other hand, Coleridge, he brings in the naturalistic elements. Like, for example, he brings in the element of the sea. He projects sea, right, as a very, and in a very exotic image, right? He projects sea in a completely different image that is so different to us, or that is so familiar to us. The best example is the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And another popular thing is Dejection and Ode, 1802. It was one of the last of his great poems. He talks about, his desperation, his hopelessness, how he is disappointed, his own personal account. Then comes Confessions of an Inquiring Spirit. It was edited by his nephew, H.N. Coleridge. It was published posthumously in 1840. Confessions is nothing but he confesses certain of his opinions, his ideas, the things which he supported, the things which he opposed, his opinions, and his creative process, and the entire romantic tradition, and also about his personal life, right? Another important work is Biographia Literaria. It was published in 1817. It accounts of his life and critical essays on philosophical and literary subjects. He touches on literary subjects too. He brings in the discussion about various authors. He discusses about their writing style, their creative process, their impact, the impact of their writings on society, and so on. So, Biographia Literaria, it's a collection of philosophical and literary subjects. So it presents Coleridge's theories of the creative imagination. So out of all the romantic poets, Coleridge was very much particular about how the mind of a romantic poet or a romantic writer works. How he conceives his thought, how he processes creative imagination. So that was concentrated much by Coleridge. So this is about Coleridge. There is another 2 point, like his friend Charles Lamb called him a damaged archangel, right? Because when one reads Coleridge, you could detect a kind of a sad tone or a very serious tone, a grimy tone, right? Which you can't help but wonder what made Coleridge write a poem like this in this tone, right? Even in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, you could see a touch of sadness, a touch of desperation. So Charles Lamb, he aptly named him as Damaged Archangel. So he was considered to be reputedly a brilliant conversationalist, and his lectures on Shakespeare remain among the most important statements in literary criticism. He had talked and discussed much about Shakespeare's works. Then comes Lord Byron. So Lord Byron, he belongs to the second generation, as we have seen in the previous slide. So the first generation, it comprised of two writers, William Wordsworth and S.C. Coleridge. The second generation, it comprises of Byron, Keats, and Shelley. Lord Byron is an embodiment of Romanticism throughout Europe, right? He became a legend. His legend was called as a Byronic legend because of his good looks, his lameness, and his flamboyant lifestyle. When you look at the personal account or the life of Lord Byron, you could understand that he's kind of a lazy. He's very lame. He was very lame, right? And he used to have a flamboyant lifestyle, aristocrat, right? He was called as a lord normally, and normally a lord would be a rich person with a lord. With a lot of lands and servants too. He belongs to aristocracy. So I hope you might understand why he had a very flamboyant lifestyle, right? So he has written two satirical pieces, English Bards and Scotch Reviewers, and The Vision of Judgment. A satire is nothing but a scathing remark on the society or what is happening around you. You have to show people what is really happening, and during that age, particularly of the Romantic age, it can be done through satire. Even in the Neoclassical age, the satire was very much popular. Pope Dryden used, and Lord Byron, he continued this trend. And the heroes of Byron, for example, Manfred, he came to be known as a Byronic hero. So, what is a Byronic, or who is a Byronic hero? One who is very serious, one who is kind of lost, serious, but at the same time, one who is persistent, right? If you've come across Christopher Marlowe's Faustus, right? Dr. Faustus, you could understand, he was very serious, he was very passionate. At the same time, he did not know the difference between the good and the bad. He was so lost in his ambition that he lost himself in the end. Similarly, Manfred, he is also a kind of hero who loses himself without knowing that he is losing himself. He's quiet, good in looks, he has all the education, he's rich, but he is a kind of a lost person. You define that kind of a person in the Byronic tradition as a Byronic hero. Then comes Cain, another hero with a skeptical attitude towards religion. Much of the religious comment or the religious opinion of Byron has been shared in the Cain. right? Then comes Beppo. It's a verse tale in Ottawa Rima. Ottawa Rima is nothing but an 8-line stanza in B pentameter, right? And then comes the most famous work, Don Juan, an epic satire combining Byron's art as a storyteller. It is an epic satire. It's quite lengthy, and it tells the story of Don Juan. So that was about the Byron. If chance permits, we'll be talking about, or we'll be reading or looking into Don Juan in a greater detail, because when you read Don Juan, you can understand why Byron, is known or was known to be or regarded as the embodiment of Romanticism, right? His legacy stands tall when that compared to that of Keats and Shelley, right? Then comes Percy Bysshe Shelley. So Shelley, he composed a great body of his poetry in Italy, right? Italy, all the sceneries, all the italic sceneries, and the buildings, the monuments, and the architecture, and particularly the nature, the natural images. They convinced Shelley, and he composed much of his great works there during his stay in Italy. The Senzai, a tragedy in verse exploring moral deformity, it was published in 1819. It is a tragedy which talks about moral deformity, whether the people, the characters in there are not able to tell the difference between the good and the bad, right? Morally acceptable, morally unacceptable. That was about the Sensei. Then in his most famous work, Prometheus Unbound, it talks about mankind's love to be free, to be autonomous, mankind's a thirst for freedom against the very gods that lay the boundaries for them. It was modeled after the idea of Plato, right? Prometheus Unbound. It was a very, it can be considered as a masterpiece of Shelley. Then Epipsychidion, a poem addressed to Emilia Vivani, a young woman whom Shelley met in Pisa and with whom he developed a brief but close friendship. Right? This he dedicated to his friend Viviani, the Epipsychidion. So, what is the main, or what are the elements could you find in Shelley's poem? The combination of philosophy, the power of human love and reason, faith in the perfectibility and ultimate progress of man. For example, Prometheus Unbound, he says, he talks about the possibilities of the progress of mankind, in which ways a man could improve himself, without the help of any other supernatural power. So that is a combination of Shelley's poetry, right? How love can transform human beings, how moral deformities could be erased by expressing love to one another, right? How man could progress from one stage to next stage. So his poems were known for beauty, grandeur, and mastery of language. Matthew Arnold, he labeled him as ineffectual angel, right? Ineffectual angel. This can be interpreted in multiple ways. Though Shelley has written, much for the progress of mankind, it was not recognized during this time, right? He was literally shouting. He was talking about, how a man could be more, much more in Prometheus Unbound. But, yeah, it was quite a sort of revolution, but that was recognized much later. He was recognized for his wit, his gifts as a satirist, and his influence as a social and political thinker, particularly satirist. Right, he was commenting about, though he belonged to the tradition of romantic poetry, he never shied away from talking about all those things happening, around him. Particularly the French Revolution, he talked about it in his works. He made allegorical references in his works. He never shied away from commenting about all those things in his work. Then comes John Keats. So, son of a livery stable keeper, Keats attended school at Enfield, where he became the friend of Charles Cowden Clarke, the headmaster's son, who encourages early learning. So, Keats, he became a scholar because of a chance that was given by, Charles Cowden Clarke, the headmaster's son, who encouraged him to learn, more. He apprenticed to a surgeon in 1811, but Keats came to know Leigh Hunt and his literary circle, and in 1816 he gave up surgery to write poetry. So Keats, he was practicing to become a surgeon, but when he met Leigh Hunt and his literary circle, he became immediately drawn to them. He was involved with them to such an extent that he left surgery and he chose to become a writer, right? Particularly poetry. His first volume of poems appeared in 1817. I stood tiptoe on a little hill, sleep and poetry, on first looking into Chapman's honor, where is some of his earliest writings. He started experimenting, right? He was so sure that he should make a mark in poetry, and he believed that he had something in him, a little kind of spark in him to write poetry. That's how, or that's why he, how to say, he came away, or he left the apprenticeship of being becoming a surgeon to write poetry. It was such a huge decision, right? So many of them, used to wonder whether Lee Hunt convinced him, right? There was an accusation too. We'll be speaking about that. So, and his one of his popular works was Endymion, that was written in 1818. It was full of rich imagery and color. Right? So Keats was attacked in Blackwood's magazine. An article berated him for belonging to Lehigh's Cockney School of Poetry. Right? So this I mentioned before. A person who was on his way to become a surgeon, he chose to leave his passion and he started, experimenting to write poetry because of Lehigh's influence and his earlier writings that that were published. The influence of Lehigh's style or influence of Lehigh's could be seen, and he was particularly accused of this, right? The Blackwoods magazine, they openly accused Keats of following the tradition that was set by Lehigh's and his Cockney School of Poetry and his followers. Lamia, Isabella, The Eve of Saint Agnes, and other poems he had written in 1820, another large volume of poems. And his very popular poems were Ode to a Nightingale, Ode on a Grecian Urn, to Autumn, Ode on Melancholy. And his posthumous pieces were La Belle Dame Sans Mercy and The Eve of Saint Agnes, right? So posthumous is nothing but after his death, these poems were published. To talk about Keats, you could say that he was really celebrating little things around him. Right? He was talking about a Grecian urn. He was talking about a nightingale. He was particularly talking about everything that he saw, about flowers, about birds, about seasons, about dispositions, temperaments, and everything. Right? So that was Keats. When I have fears that I may cease to be, bright star would I wear as steadfast as thou art. Lines on the Mermaid Taven, Fancy, Bards of Passion, and of some of his other works. Hyperion was his unfinished epic. Okay. And Keats was known to have given a concept called negative capability, to let the mind be a thoroughfare for all thought. To write about everything that comes to your mind, right? To not attach whether it could be the importance that could be attached to the thing or the object that you were meaning to convey or you were meaning to talk about. He was known for this concept, negative capability, to let the mind wander freely without any boundaries. So Hyperion was his unfinished epic. So I have given you certain quiz questions which I composed from the slides that we have seen. So the first question was, what was the period of the Romantic Age? Second question, which of the following writers authored a lyrical ballads? I'm throwing in these questions because you could actually try whether you have understood or grasped what the slide was about, slides were about, or what the romantic poets, the concept was about. The third question is, who is considered as the father of the romantic poetry? The next one is, who called Coleridge as the damaged archangel? The next question is, which of the following works of Coleridge contains critical essays on philosophical and literary subjects? Next one is, who among the following is a Byronic hero? Who among the romantic poets composed the great body of his poetry in Italy? The next one, who called Byron an ineffectual angel? John Keats was attacked in which magazine? Which was the unfinished work of Keats? So you can leisurely work out the answer for these questions, and it is suffice that you have a look at all the slides, because in the previous class we have seen about the characteristics of romantic age. So I thought I would talk about the writers, introduce the writers and their important works. Right. And because we have to talk about the Victorian age in our next class, I thought I will throw a little light on these five writers and their poetic tradition. So these are the references: William Henry Hudson's An Outline History of English Literature, and Arthur Compton Rickett, A History of English Literature. And I've also given another PPT slide share from SlideShare website to understand the tradition of the Romantic poets a little better, right? So we'll see in the next class. Thank you.